The Star Wars galaxy is vast and ancient. Millennia before the rise of the Empire or even the creation of the Galactic Republic lived a people of Force-sensitive individuals known as the Zeffo. All that remain of their culture and civilization are bygone tombs and ruins, and many of their ways have been forgotten, lost to time. The only information we have about them is very limited and fragmentary, and the few that we do have still leave a lot of room for interpretation. But despite this lacunary knowledge, what we can piece together of the rise and fall of the Zeffo gives us a glimpse of what their civilization might have looked like, and gives us insight into what can cause a people of Force sensitives to fall the way they did. The Zeffo's story and fate can help us fill in the gaps in the history of the Jedi Order, and each can help us better understand the other's collapse. Zeffo is a harsh planet of the Outer Rim, swept by strong electromagnetic winds. Its surface is covered by sharp mountains, with an ice cave system underneath them and somewhat grassy cliffs between the two. It is there that the Zephonian species emerged. They were humanoid in appearance, about 2 meters tall on average, were brownish red in color, didn't have noses, and had skulls that were notably flat and elongated on the sides and back of their heads above their foreheads. Most of the Zeffo were Force sensitive, and so their culture as a whole had a particular relationship with the Force, with it being a crucial part of their entire society. They called it the life wind, and considered it a fundamental force of nature, akin to the powerful winds of their home planet. The Zeffo wanted to cultivate their connection to the life wind, and therefore their connection to nature. Those among the Zeffo who could proficiently wield the life wind were revered and deemed sages, and were essentially the leaders of the Zeffo civilization. From those few, 3 were remembered above all others, the 3 sages. The first of the 3 sages is Iram. Iram was revered for their strong connection to the life wind. They had a particular love for the planet Kashyyyk and were the first of their species to establish a relationship with its inhabitants, the Wookiees. As a testament for this, a small shrine was built on the planet, atop the massive origin tree. The shrine itself was very small in comparison to other Zeffo structures, and contained an astrium, an artifact of great significance to the Zeffo that was also connected to the Force in some way. Alram trained other Zeffo to use the life wind inside a vast underground structure. This structure was carved from a stone cave underneath a mountain, and was built to emulate Kashyyyk's canopy, a tribute to the sage's love for the planet. Its entrance was located in the eye of a tornado, and the entire structure was built in harmony with the natural forces of Zeffo, redirecting its powerful winds through vents and chimes, creating an ideal environment to train in communing with the life wind. The storm guarding the entrance of the building might even have been artificially created by the Zeffo using those vents. After Alram died, they were buried under a big carving of a rusher tree, a species native from Kashyyyk. The structure they used to train others in became their tomb, guarded by ferocious tomb guardians, automatons built in the likeness of the Zeffo, tasked with eliminating any intruders that would seek to desecrate the sage's final resting place. Around this time, the Zeffo started visiting other worlds, like bygone, where they held pilgrimages. Bygone was home to a large creature called the bygone, which held some kind of significance for them and their culture, and may be the reason for their original interest in the planet. The era of Alram was an age of peace and purity for the Zeffo. They lived in harmony with the life wind and with nature itself, which they considered an incarnation of the Force. They lived in communion with their home planet and its resources and powers, rarely leaving it, and if so, only to worship nature elsewhere, and in a way that did not leave an imprint too big on those foreign worlds. They were content living in connection to the Force, training their people to commune with it. Their core beliefs in the life wind were at the heart of their society, making this age one of unity and harmony, the likes of which would never be seen again in the history of the Zeffo. Widely considered the height of the Republic and the Jedi Order, the High Republic was a time of prosperity for the galaxy. It was an age of expansion and exploration, with many Pathfinder teams, accompanied by Jedi escorts, dispatched throughout the galactic frontier within the Outer Rim, tasked with charting hyperlanes to facilitate hyperspace travel and with spreading the Republic's influence to the far reaches of the galaxy. Despite its own will, the Republic itself couldn't directly interfere with non-member planets should they require aid. But when necessary, the Jedi Order didn't hesitate to offer its help to those in need, like Anabadas and Glome, as well as Ganseva, Cedra Minor, Divac, Nalhutta, and many others. For even though the Jedi were working together with the Republic and its chancellors, they still could operate outside its jurisdiction. They favored following the way of the Force rather than the orders of the Senate, standing for peace and justice in the galaxy. The Jedi's influence was widespread, and their traditional robes were bright and golden in color, a symbol of light and life and of the glory of this age. The High Republic era also saw the appearance of many unusual lightsabers. Some of them, like that of Master Stellan Geos, notably featured a crossguard. Similarly, that of his Padawan, Vernestra Rowe, could be turned from a straight blade into a whip, and others, like that of Master Porter Engel, featured an elegant handguard akin to a real lightsaber. Overall, the Jedi Order allowed more individual freedom to its members, even allowing them, if they so chose, to become independent from the Jedi Council and its commands, instead following the will and flow of the Force directly. Those Jedi were called Wayseekers, and though they were very uncommon, they mostly weren't looked down upon by the other Knights and Masters. The Jedi of the High Republic could fight if necessary, but always privileged knowledge and defense rather than attack. Some of them, like Master Cylindra Show, applied those principles literally, favoring the usage of a shield to using her own lightsaber whenever possible. The Jedi acted as guardians of peace, serving as mediators in conflicts where the Republic couldn't directly intervene, like the forever war between Iram and Arano, supervising peace negotiations and bringing together the neighboring worlds. This era of peace and exploration culminated with the construction of Starlight Beacon, a space station operating as a massive communications relay that would link the planets of the frontier to each other and to the rest of the galaxy. Starlight also served as a massive Republican outpost and Jedi temple in the Outer Rim, a symbol of the light they both brought, and was used for multiple relief efforts in the few years it was active. However, the peace and glory of this golden age didn't go undisturbed. The Path of the Open Hand, a sect that considered using the Force was actually abusing it, first tried to incite distrust of the Jedi Order, disrupting the peace negotiations between Aram and Arano during the Battle of Jeddah. The Path also used the terrible powers of the Nameless, mysterious creatures whose mere presence could overwhelm and even kill Force users, in an attempt to rid the galaxy of the Jedi. Following in their footsteps, the Nile, led by their eye Markion Ro, set on to claim the frontier as their own territory, determined to root the Republic and the Jedi out. Those marauders notably instigated the Great Disaster, during which emergencies, shrapnel from a destroyed freighter traveling at light speed, crashed into many planets throughout the frontier, causing untold destruction. Markion Ro eventually managed to strike a direct blow to the Republic and the Jedi, destroying Starlight Beacon, their pride and joy and the symbol of their glory, and, with the use of storm seeds, isolating Nile space from any invaders through the storm wall in what would become known as the Occlusion Zone. And despite the Jedi's eventual victory over those threats, their ideals had been shaken by the losses they suffered, and their beliefs were left weakened. With these trials, they lost part of their idealism and the purity of their beliefs, and awaiting the Jedi Order at the end of its golden age was only an era of passivity, complacency, and hubris. After achieving domination over their home and its natural forces, the Zeffo were living a glorious age. Their civilization now spread to other planets of the galaxy, and they established settlements and left significant traces of their passage on worlds like Bogano and Ontotho. Both were notable for sharing a similarity with the Zeffo's home planet. Bogano's electromagnetic winds and Ontotho's mountainous landscape were probably what drove the Zeffo to establish themselves on those specific worlds. The Zeffo may also have been the same ancients that built the giant walker on Skara Null in the Calder Trinari system, as a way of expanding their own power and ensuring their dominion over additional worlds. Having mastered the natural energy of the life wind, the Zeffo began seeking control over the fundamental forces of the universe. They developed a technology that allowed them to emulate their planet's gravitational pull with magnetic energy, using this discovery in an ornamental way in a show of power and pride. In their arrogance, the Zeffo began reveling in their own greatness, worshipping the notion of power itself more than the life wind that granted them this power. This shift had repercussions in their entire culture, and notably in their architecture. The natural shapes made of stone were replaced by the rigidity of straight metallic lines. The second of the three sages, Mictrel, native of this era, further illustrates this change. Mictrel was extremely powerful and proficient in their use of the life wind, and, with this emerging worship of power, was revered as a god by the other Zeffo. They demanded offerings, notably spherical votive candles, a symbol of Mictrel's supposed unending power. The pilgrimages of the Zeffo, formerly aiming to strengthen their connection to nature and the life wind, now existed only to venerate the sage's power, as well as themselves. Mictrol was also known for traveling to the planet bygone at some point, and more specifically to a vault located on the planet. Out of all the structures built on bygone by the Zeffo, the vault stood out from the rest due to its sheer size and impact on the otherwise unspoiled terrain. The structure's main chamber existed in a realm that could only be accessed by people sensitive to the Force, as it seemingly didn't exist in the physical world, and an S-stream was needed to activate the vault itself. Meditating inside the activated vault could grant visions from a possible future. As part of a memorable event, Mictrol visited the vault with an astrium, supposedly accompanied with a procession of followers. As a testament of this, a significant part of the offerings the sage demanded were statues and carvings of Zeffo carrying astriums. It is even possible that Mictrol achieved their master over the life wind with the use of the bygone vault in the first place. A massive structure was built in Mictrol's honor, a tribute to their might. What would become Mictrol's tomb after their death consisted of a circular building crowned by a cupola, similar to the temple on Ontotho, but prominently featuring a statue of Mictrol, taller than the entire structure, that served as the entrance. The mausoleum didn't feature any vents to canalize the Zephonian winds like Elram's tomb did. In their place stood the devices emulating the planet's gravity, used as an ornamental motif and as a representation of Mictrol's power. The tomb also featured an immense spire, which could be raised if it was activated. Though the structure was located underground, the spire, when raised, could reach the planet's surface, dwarfing by its sheer size the terrain and buildings nearby, and even the adjacent mountains. This spire was a symbol of Mictrol's great power, and a flagrant display of their arrogance. The structure was protected from looters by automated guardians, which notably featured more ornate designs than those watching over Elram's tomb. As for Mictrol themselves, they were placed in a massive metallic sarcophagus, suspended above a deep chasm by heavy chains. Unlike Elram's sarcophagus, which was displayed in the center of their tomb below ground and visible through a glass pane, Mictrol's was built to be grandiose and positioned to be inaccessible and out of reach, once again reinforcing their superiority over the other Zeffo. In order to build the architectural marvel that is the tomb of Mictrol, many Zeffo were tirelessly overworked. A good number of workers died in the process, but they were forgotten, their corpses left in place to rot. Offerings and votive candles kept arriving even after the sage's death, and pilgrimages to their tomb in the honor of their glory persisted. Those offerings to Mictrol were sacred, and those who would try and steal them were executed without mercy and their bodies unceremoniously abandoned within the tomb. Though this may have appeared like a golden age for the Zeffo civilization, the era of Mictrol only illustrates their growing distancing from their roots. In their hubris, they forsook the force that granted them their power, preferring to revere themselves in their own glory. And as such, their foundations became more fragile. Millennia later, though the tomb of Elram had become infested by scars and fungi, and despite its ancientness and its ruined state due to the shifting terrain, it remained mostly functional. This, however, isn't the case for the tomb of Mictrol, that became so overrun by vegetation and fauna that most systems implemented by the Zeffo were damaged, if not totally unusable. Even the spire of Mictrol was overtaken by wooden roots, a reminder that the might the Zeffo thought they had was nothing compared to that of nature, and compared to the Force. Their apparent power and strength didn't survive the test of time, and was proven to be only a hollow delusion. But as this delusion of control continued to fester, it only heralded a new era, an era of darkness. Following the High Republic, the Jedi Order was at the height of its power. Having defeated the Sith millennia before, and the rest of their foes a few centuries ago, the Jedi stood unopposed as peacekeepers at the heart of the Republic. But what could have been an era of peace and prosperity the likes of which had never been seen before in the galaxy was only an age of contempt and complacency that eventually led to the Order's collapse. Arrogance slowly crept its way inside the heart of the Jedi, corrupting even the most respected of them, those supposed to be the wisest and with the most experience. Once a trusted advisor of many chancellors in the High Republic, and one the Jedi could always go to for help and advice, Grand Master Yoda, despite noticing this growing hubris within the Jedi, didn't see it take root inside himself. And when a distressed Anakin Skywalker confided to him about his doubts and troubles, Yoda couldn't provide him the help he so desperately needed. Anakin had come to him about his fear of losing someone he loved, his wife Padme, but Yoda told him that he shouldn't be sad and that he should instead find solace in his loved one's death, failing to recognize that the Jedi's preachings weren't what Anakin needed to hear in that moment. This failure of the Jedi to understand Anakin's feelings, caused by their extreme belief that he shouldn't have them in the first place, was a key factor in his falling into the hands of Darth Sidious and his being corrupted by the Sith. Blinded by the self-righteousness of their beliefs, the Jedi ended up abandoning their striving to follow the way of the Force above all else, and subordinated themselves to the Senate, becoming no more than glorified enforcers of the Republic. In their arrogance, they deemed the Jedi Council's commands as absolute, and looked down upon those who would question them. This eventually led to the Wayseekers' disappearance, as their very nature of following the Force outside the Council's control was in direct opposition with this doctrine. The Wayseekers' disappearance was a significant step in the fall of the Jedi Order, due to what they represented, an unbiased wish to bring light to the galaxy regardless of loyalties and allegiances, and a force keeping the Council from growing overconfident in themselves by showing them a different point of view on the Force and the Jedi. The Wayseekers eventually faded from memory as well, with the very possibility of being one becoming nonsense for many, as they thought for good reason that it would never be allowed by the Council in the first place. The Jedi had become so blinded by tradition and their past glories that they didn't notice the dark side growing both in front of them, with the Sith's unnoticed takeover of the Senate and the Republic, and within them. The Jedi's self-righteousness and overconfidence convinced them that they were following the right path, no matter their decisions, and made them oblivious to the darkness of their own actions and their consequences. This caused many Jedi to question their place within the Order and the truth and value of its teachings. Some of them, like Master Qui-Gon Jinn, confronted the Council directly about their decisions if he disagreed with them, although while keeping his allegiance to the Jedi, to the Light, and to the Force, not unlike the Wayseekers did. But many others didn't seek such specific solutions to the Order's growing coldness and hostility. By desperately trying to hide her true origin from the Jedi Iskata Karis out of shame and allowing her to be mistreated by her peers her entire life, the Order, even including respected Jedi Master Mace Windu, only paved the path that would lead her toward the dark side and toward joining the Empire's Inquisitorius as the 13th sister. Windu's open mistrust of Anakin Skywalker was also a major factor in his turning to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader. The Jedi Council's subservience to the Senate and the Republic even led them to turn against one another, yielding to Admiral Tarkin's demands to expel Ahsoka Tano from the Order for her to be tried for crimes she didn't commit. This act, despite being a blatantly unfair one, was allowed by the Council and defended by Master Windu. And even though the truth ended up being revealed, sparing Ahsoka from a death penalty, the Council was still blinded enough by self-righteousness that they told Ahsoka this was only a great trial she had to face as a Jedi, and couldn't understand why she turned down their offer to rejoin the Order after that, even, in Windu's case, despising her for her decision. The absolute nature of the Jedi's self-righteousness further proves that they had ended up being precisely the opposite of what they were meant to be, as they themselves considered absolutes to be a hallmark of the Sith. Instead of being the mediators and peacekeepers they were supposed to be, they became soldiers and generals during the Clone Wars, taking on a military leadership role they were never meant to have. This pushed several of them to their limits, such as Barriss Offee, who had realized the failure of the Jedi Order and would later, though temporarily, join Vader's Inquisitorius as well. The war and violence condoned, willingly or not, by the Jedi, exemplified their failure as agents of the light, which only led the galaxy into the hands of the dark side and of a ruthless emperor. Hubris had taken its toll on the Zeffo. Arrogance had made them stray from their path and from their origins. As a new age began for their civilization, the Zeffo established themselves on Dathomir, leaving their homeworld for one that would bring them closer to power and to the dark side of the Force. The leader of the Zeffo this era was Sage Kujet, a power-hungry tyrant who wished to rule over everything. Kujet's influence spread even beyond the reaches of the galaxy, as traces of his reign can be found on the planet Peridia in a distant galaxy. Promising power to his followers, Kujet had a castle built on Dathomir, from where he reigned over the Zeffo. Kujet thought himself as the incarnation of the Zeffo culture and civilization, viewing the other members of his species as below him, mere servants made to obey his every whim, and so he kept the way into his fortress secret to them. To him, only his power mattered, and so he went on to destroy all Zeffo astriums, seeking to keep their power for himself alone. He went so far as to even destroy all representation of them, to erase them entirely from memory. A testament of this, many circular objects were destroyed with rage in the other sages' tombs, more notably Mictrol's, and a tomb guardian in Alram's tomb was destroyed as well, supposedly after unsuccessfully attempting to protect their relics. In his quest of destruction, Kujet only missed one representation of the astrium within the spire on Mictrol's tomb, which necessitated a special activation process to access, one he supposedly wouldn't know about or wouldn't have taken the time to study and discover. Similarly, one singular astrium escaped Kujet's wrath, one located within the shrine atop the origin tree on Kashyyyk. Blinded by rage, Kujet didn't pay attention to the Russia tree carvings within Aram's tomb and didn't look into their meaning. The Zeffo's presence on Kashyyyk was furthermore very subtle, and Kujet probably thought it meaningless, if he even was aware of it in the first place. His reign of terror didn't go unopposed, as a dissident Zeffo faction seemingly attempted an uprising against Kujet and led an attack on his fortress. However, these rebels were all brutally destroyed, possibly by the power of his astrium or the Nameless, their remnants still lining the halls of his citadel. Kujet reveled in the fear his subjects had for him, and had low reliefs carved upon the walls of his throne room in memory of those massacres. Kujet thought it was fitting for the Zeffo civilization to end after his death, and that mindset caused the collapse of his people after his passing. He was entombed within his fortress on the Thamir, the hands of his mummified corpse still grasping his astrium inside his sarcophagus. A new sage, or an assembly of sages, seemingly took on the leadership of the Zeffo, attempting to rebuild from the ashes of Kujet's reign. However, twilight had come for their civilization, and they abandoned Dathomir, leaving Kujet's tomb without protection from outsiders beside the remnants of his darkness that still tainted the grounds. From an enlightened people, the Zeffo had let themselves be corrupted by hubris, until they almost wept themselves out in a vain pursuit of power. We only know of their fate that their path led them toward the unknown regions, where the last traces of their passage vanish.
I offer this record of our civilization to those who will follow. Despite our wisdom and technological achievement, we face extinction. Dogma blinded us to the path of balance, and gradually we allowed our pride to corrupt us. The greater control we sought, the further we fell into ruin. I lead the remnants of my people into the great unknown, hoping that we will finally find peace.
The story of the Zeffo is that of an order that was founded on the basis of purity of belief and harmony, that thrived on this purity and used it to grow into a glorious civilization. This glory, however, caused them to succumb to hubris, which in turn made them stray from the harmony they originated from, and twist their beliefs to benefit themselves. This growing arrogance rendered them easier to corrupt, and so they slowly fell into the thrall of the dark side that led them to their end. And this story, as I've tried to illustrate throughout this video, is also that of the fall of the Jedi Order. Even Luke Skywalker's own order fell in much the same way, weakened by his own hubris and overconfidence, as he too would realize all too late. This pattern therefore seems to be destined to eventually taint and define all civilizations, an unavoidable path to their collapse. But it may not be as inescapable as one may think. To find the key, however, we must take a step back, as the Zeffo civilization doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it has to be considered in the context it was created in. For the story of the Zeffo is the story of Jedi Fallen Order. Fallen Order is a story of trauma and guilt, of growing beyond that guilt to become better, a story of facing one's fears and darkness in order to take the right decisions. The story itself doesn't focus on the Zeffo, and despite my being an avid fan of theirs, they act more as a simple background element, the various tombs acting as levels, puzzles, and set pieces. Rather, they are elements of a quest created by the Jedi Master Eno Cordova, who himself studied the history of the Zeffo, and, after getting a vision of the Jedi Order's collapse in the vault on Bogano, decided to hide a holocron with a list of 4 sensitive children inside the vault, so that it would be possible to rebuild the Order. Cordova designed his quest so that whoever would find his holocron would have to visit the tombs of the 3 sages, Aram, Mictrol, and Kujet, and therefore discover and learn from the Zeffo's mistakes, and thus from the Jedi's mistakes. The one to take on Cordova's quest, the former Jedi Padawan Cal Kestis, the main character of both Fallen Order and Survivor, also lies at the heart of this theme. Through his quest for the holocron, Cal is faced with the history of the Zeffo and with that of the Jedi. The uncovered truth about the story of his order makes him evolve. The darkness of Kujet's tomb on the Thamir forces him to confront his fears and guilt and to face the dark side, his dark side, more directly, incarnated here by the fallen Jedi Taron Malicos, who had, unlike Cal, let himself be corrupted by Kujet's lingering darkness and power. However, Cal rejects Malicos' promises of a new order based on strength. Within the accursed tomb, he defeats the fallen Jedi, gaining the strength to access Kujet's Astrium and to activate the vault on Bogano, and proving his worth and earning his title of Jedi Knight. Later in his journey, Cal encounters the character of Dagan Gera, in which the story of corruption shared by the Zeffo and the Jedi is reflected, though on a much smaller scale, a personal scale. Dagan was a renowned Jedi Knight from the era of the High Republic, a glorious age for the Order and the galaxy. However, hubris and greed took hold of him, and he came to consider his discovery, the hidden planet Tenelor, as his property and right. Dagan let himself be corrupted by his arrogance, by his obsession, and by the dark side, which led him to his downfall just like it did for the Zeffo and the Jedi, as Cal is forced to take him down once and for all. However, despite his victory, despite his progress, Cal remains vulnerable to the same flaws that befell his predecessors, and is still at risk of eventually sharing Dagan's fate of losing his way, namely due to his obsession to his fight. But what stops him, what stands between Cal and his path to corruption, the key to avoiding that same path that seemed unescapable for the Zeffo and the Jedi and Dagan, is someone, a character, I've deliberately omitted up until now: Merrin. Merrin is a Night Sister, one of the last survivors of her kind, who meets Cal during his journey under Thamir. And though at first her and Cal did start on the wrong foot, they eventually grow closer, and she ends up joining his crew aboard the Stinger Mantis. This forced Merrin to let go of many of her people's traditions in order to survive, and to better wield her power, making it her own. Exploring the galaxy allowed Merrin to grow beyond the grief and pain of her sister's death, and to find herself. Merrin offers Cal a different perspective, a more pragmatic and balanced perspective, and she has from the very beginning, even before her own journey of discovery. In the Tomb of Kujet, she helps Cal realize that Malicos doesn't represent what the Jedi were, and isn't what they have to evolve into. She helps him defeat Malicos, even dealing the final blow herself, burying the fallen Jedi alongside the darkness of the tomb. They help each other realize that since both of their orders, the Jedi and the Night Sisters, are gone, they don't have to follow in their footsteps. Their ancestral feud doesn't need to define them, and they can work together as survivors. As Cal nears the end of his quest for Cordova's holocron, she is the one to first bring up the idea that maybe the holocron shouldn't be used in the first place, as it would endanger all the children on the list it contains. This idea is further reinforced by the vision granted to Cal inside the vault on Bogano, which eventually leads to Cal choosing to destroy Cordova's holocron instead of putting those lives at risk. When the two meet again on Jeddah after years apart, Merrin shows Cal that stepping out of the fight can also allow for change, something he couldn't comprehend before their separation. And after Cal's defeat of Dagan Gera, she makes him realize that he can desire something other than what he has always known. She prevents Cal from letting himself be blinded by the Jedi dogma and makes him see the flaws in their code. And so, he decides to evolve past it, allowing himself to grow attached to Merrin and to let his love for her manifest. And when Cal is driven at the verge of the dark side due to anger and frustration and sadness and loss and desperation, she is the one to remind him of who he is, of who he needs to be, and that he mustn't lose himself in the darkness he is so desperately trying to fight. Merrin acts as an indirect control force, keeping Cal in check, both from the ever-threatening darkness and the overzealous light. This is the key that, had the Zeffo had it, would have helped prevent their fall, would have prevented them from letting hubris take hold of them as it did Mictrol, and from letting the dark side corrupt them as it did Kujet. This is what the Wayseekers represented for the Jedi Order, before, in their arrogance and overconfidence, they decided to slowly outlaw them. This is who Santari Kree was for Dagan Gera. She was the one who kept his impatience at bay, and the only one able to forcefully stop him when he fully succumbed to his obsession for Tenelor. What could have prevented the Zeffo and the Jedi's collapse is an unbiased force responsible for keeping them in balance, despite them wavering between shadow and brightness, between the darkness's tempting power and false promises, and the light's conceited misguided complacency and blind dogma. For only in the balance between those two extremes is it possible to find peace in the eye of the storm. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to my ramblings about the Zeffo till the end. If this kind of video interests you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so to be notified when new ones come out. You can also leave a like on this video or comment your thoughts about it if you wish to do so. Your support is greatly appreciated. The fact that this video had to exist in the first place was a given. As I already mentioned, I am way too knowledgeable about the Zeffo to not have a video on this subject. However, for quite some time I wasn't sure about how to go about it. I already had the symbolism and the meaning of the architecture down, but I couldn't quite grasp what to do with it, until I compared them to the story of the Jedi, and the structure of the video came naturally from there. However, I have to admit that I did take a long break during the writing process itself, first off because I simply didn't have the inspiration to continue, but also because I have more projects, big projects, going on behind the scenes that take most of my time. That and studies too. More about all that in due time, but know that it will be massive. The fact that I didn't have a tool to make elaborate cinematic captures of the game also hindered my motivation, but I ended up finding what I was looking for. All references for that are in the description if you want to know more. The conclusion was also quite difficult to write, and I've had to write a few different versions of it. The reason for this is that I couldn't quite figure a fitting end to my argument. But then I realized that in my desire to delve into the Zeffo story in Jedi Fallen Order, I'd neglected the fact that it didn't stand alone, and that it was only half of a whole. And only when I also considered Jedi Survivor's story was I able to write my conclusion. But even then I've had to try and retry and yeah, it was the whole thing. To write this video, I was inspired by Mossbagg's The Mostly Complete Lore of Hollow Knight, especially in the way things were formulated as a kind of theoretical history, a recouping of game elements allowing us to take guesses as to what they really mean. And in that regard, I do not claim to hold the definite truth. You are totally free to disagree with things I've said, even more so since I added a few theories of mine that I thought made sense in the greater history of the Zeffo into the mix. I do not claim to have been exhaustive either, or to have treated in their integrality the themes the games, and Star Wars in general, address. This isn't my goal in the first place. I only hope I made you think about the Zeffo and the Jedi, and what they represent in the Star Wars universe, and to have offered you new perspectives you maybe wouldn't have thought about before. You can join my Discord server if you wish to do so, it's barely active but who cares, and also follow me on Instagram if you want to, links in the description. That's it for me. I'll see you around.